The girls didn't speak. They pressed themselves against the wall. There, for the first time, they saw bulls and cows in the flesh, up close. There, too, they saw calves pressed close to their mothers. Some of the calves were the same size as the twins. Their eyes met. The twins saw the calves for what they truly were. Children. I'm ahead of the curve, aka James Bergman. In this book review, I will be discussing Meat, written by Joseph DeLacy, first published in 2008. Assuming the viewers of this video are not necessarily familiar with this particular piece, I will read out the blurb at the back just to get us all on the same page, if you'll pardon the pun. Aberine is a decaying town trapped in an advancing wilderness. Its people depend on meat for their survival, meat supplied by the processing plant on the edge of town. A feud smoulders between the town's religious and secular powers. Whoever controls the food supply controls everything. But the townsfolk are hungry. They must be fed. When I first picked up this book and began reading it, I didn't realise how transgressive and philosophical and outright horrifying the contents of this book actually are. One main theme that I definitely did pick up on, shock horror as a vegan, was how meat is portrayed throughout the piece. And it's interesting because the author himself even says that he's not a vegetarian, but the afterword of the book tells you a lot about his inspiration for writing such a book that exposes how meat eating is in itself a cult, and how the cognitive dissonance is so deep-seated that there's no other way, no other alternative than to continue what we've been doing for centuries, and that in itself is seen often as its own justification. The following is a few sections of the afterword that I've just mentioned. I'm not a vegetarian, yet. Nor am I on some kind of animal welfare crusade. I'm just one of those people who can't help thinking about things. If you don't have the stomach to kill, gut, skin, and dress an animal, you ought not have the stomach to eat it either. Much of the impetus for this book arose from that double standard. Consumers are very happy to pick and choose their cuts of meat after they've reached the butcher shop or supermarket. If they ever think about the process that got the meat there, they must put the truth out of their heads in order to enjoy their ribeye steak, neck fillet, belly, or breast. In meat, I put humans through abattoirs for the freak factor, for the sheer horror of it. But all the time it was the animals I saw in my mind's eye. Animals waiting in lines in narrow steel corridors, waiting for death at the hands of men with targets to meet. Believe me, they don't go quietly or willingly. Who would? I found that afterword extremely interesting, especially after finishing the book as a whole, because even through this entire process, the author himself was not a vegetarian. And I haven't looked it up, but perhaps he is a vegetarian or vegan at this point. But the very fact remains, and this is perhaps even exposing himself as the writer, it just goes to show that even if we know the very depths of hell that we needlessly put animals through in factory farms and so on, there's still this cognitive dissonance. There is still this demand for taste pleasure over the safety and security, the integrity, and the outright preservation of animals that are needlessly, and I do mean needlessly, murdered for these such subjective and anecdotal, selfish reasons. You may be wondering, I didn't click on this review for a vegan speech to be converted, and I say to that, fair enough. However, this book forces you to think about the topic, and I'm not bringing it up without any necessity here, because the book is, again, predicated on this idea that we need meat to survive. And whilst it's taken to the extreme of it being an actual religion or a cult, in the fictional piece, I must specify that the same thing is indeed done without any religious cult mandating such actions. We do it out of our own free volition. I just found it interesting how the book takes it to that next level, but at the same degree, we do the same. We just don't have a per se religious doctrine around it, although I would call it a metaphorical truth. We act as if it's some kind of only path to healthy eating or living. And so that's where I saw the juxtaposition between the metaphorical idea and the idea that we act out, that is still metaphorical, but it's not in the placeholder of any kind of religion or cult. I would say that this book alone is brilliant because it gets us to question eating meat and the ethical standards that we have to maintain to keep on doing so. And the book never ever eating meat, taking some pressure off of the meat eating and the whole vegan kind of topic, even though, as I mentioned, it is a big theme of the book. Another big theme in general is how transgressive the piece is overall. I mean, very gory things occur throughout this story. The animals to the people. And I just wanted to read out a page, the beginning of chapter 21. And yeah, so I'll read it out and see what you think. He preferred women who fought, women who struggled and cried out before giving in to him. The problem was, she wanted it too bloody much. Her husband had neglected her for far too long. She slept now, naked beside him in his huge bed. Magnus couldn't sleep. The sex hadn't been enough for him, and there were other things on his mind. Shanti hadn't responded yet. Why hadn't he come? Didn't the man care about his family? It could be argued that he didn't care much about his wife, judging by her willingness to betray him. But what about the twins? Didn't he worry about what might happen to his two beautiful little girls? The thought was enough to make his groin tingle and his cock stir. He pulled the cord for the maids. Far off in the mansion, a bell rang. Go in there and tie her up. Gag her and blindfold her. Do what you want with her. Enjoy yourselves. When she looks like she's stopped having fun, you can come and get me. Then we'll take our time. I think I could go on until morning. Tomorrow we'll start on the twins. So, as demonstrated from this section alone, it is a pretty gritty story, and the characters are grotesque, to say the least. It was until halfway through I realised categorically this is actually a transgressive fiction piece. Because leading up to it, of course, it was very transgressive, these ideas are very deep, lots of ethical decisions are being made, and there's just a lot of questioning and such like that. And it really hit me, like, I'm reading a transgressive piece, and that happens to me a lot, because, like I've said on the podcast, The Bastard Sons of Oedipus, with Cody Sexton and G.C. Mackay, we've all agreed that it's so easy to read a book and then not even realise that it's been a transgressive piece the entire time. It's kind of said, as a joke, that those who get into transgressive fiction at first never understand what they're even getting into, because they don't even know what transgressive fiction is, because it's such a... no one even knows what it is because it's just not talked about, right, as a topic, as a genre. And so this book in its own right is a brilliant transgressive piece. It's got, as I said, these ethical dilemmas. It's got these characters that are just slime balls and, like, just so grotesque as a narrative as it goes on, and what happens and how it concludes, again, is very philosophical and very reminiscent of the whole meat debate. And even if you're not interested in that in particular, it's just a great story. I mean, you could read this book like you could with all great books, such as 1984, not to compare this to that, but in the same regard, as you can read both of them and enjoy the book for what it is. But if you actually want to look more deeper into the piece, then you, well, can. And this is the beauty of this book in particular, because you can read this and, well, you can try and read this and be chilled out and not disturbed, but it inevitably will disturb you, and I can guarantee that. It really did make my eyebrow raise many times, and I honestly just had to laugh at how absurd a lot of the writing was, and not in a bad way, because the writing was very, very good. I mean, the vocabulary and so on, it's really well done, and I'm honestly surprised that this book isn't talked about more. Although on the front of the piece, Stephen King said that the author rocks, so that's probably a good sign coming from Stephen King, which I am yet to review any of his books on this channel. I will do at some point, by the way, just for those Stephen King fans out there. So yeah, it's a really solid book that has a lot to think about, and again, it's one of these books, like you do see in transgressive fiction, that forces itself upon you to think. It doesn't give you the option to think. It forces you, it shoves it in your face and says, look, this is completely morally corrupt. What do you think of this, right? Because it doesn't ask the question directly, it asks it indirectly through how the characters act around each other and in those situations. Again, I can't really go into the details of the narrative, and I don't want to for those reasons. If you like transgressive fiction, pick this book up. Like, literally, it is a good book, okay? Just alone for transgressive fiction. If you are interested in the veganism, meat-eating debate, this book will also interest you. So yeah, I can't really praise this book enough at the moment. It just got me to think. It was also a very captivating and disturbing story. I would like to reread this piece as well, because it was a fairly complex story, considering how there are different characters with different motives, and I feel like even by the end I was like, wow, I don't think I even understood everything in the book, because that's how many subplots or how many deep-seated characters there were. I look forward to rereading this whenever I will. As you may have noticed as well, this has been a very unscripted video, and this is because I tend to avoid scripts when I am so full of ideas, I guess, and so full of things to say about a book, and I feel like they were all just jumping out on me when I'm filming this. And so yeah, it's been a bit of a tangent at times, which is kind of my style at this point, but I guess some of you like that about these reviews at times. And yeah, if you've already read this piece, let me know what you thought of it, if you liked it or if you disliked it. I've been ahead of the curve. Do read this book, check it out, and I'll see you in the next video. Au revoir.